The Secret Doctrine by Elena Petrovna Blavatsky, a facsimile of the original edition of 1888, printed by the Cunningham Press, Alhambra, California. Book 2, Part 1, Anthropogenesis, stanzas translated with commentaries, from the Secret Book of John.
Stanza 8, Evolution of the Animal Mammalians, the First Fall, with subsections, verse 28, how the first mammals were produced, 29, a quasi-Darwinian evolution, 30, the animals get solid bodies, verse 31, their separation into sexes, verse 32, the first sin of the mindless men. Verse 28, from the drops of sweat, from the residue of the substance, matter from dead bodies and animals of the real before, previous third round, and from cast-off dust, the first animals of this round were produced. The occult doctrine maintains that, in this round, the mammalians were a later work of the evolution than man. Evolution proceeds in cycles. The great manvanteric cycle of 7 rounds, beginning in the first round with mineral, vegetable, and animal, brings its evolutionary work on the descending arc to a dead stop in the middle of the 4th race, at the close of the first half of the 4th round. It is on our earth, then, the 4th sphere and the lowest, and in the present round that this middle point has been reached. And since the monad has passed after its first metallization on globe A, through the mineral, vegetable, and animal worlds in every degree of the 3 states of matter, except the last degree of the 3rd or solid state, which it reached only at the midpoint of evolution, it is but logical and natural that at the beginning of the 4th round on globe D, man should be the first to appear, and also that his frame should be of the most tenuous matter that is compatible with objectivity. To make it still clearer, if the monad begins its cycle of incarnations through the 3 objective kingdoms on the descending curved line, it has necessarily to enter on the reascending curved line of the sphere as a man also. On the descending arc, it is the spiritual which is gradually transformed into the material. On the middle line of the base, spirit and matter are equilibrized in man. On the ascending arc, spirit is slowly reasserting itself at the expense of the physical, or matter, so that at the close of the 7th race of the 7th round, the monad will find itself as free from matter and all its qualities as it was in the beginning, having gained in addition the experience and wisdom, the fruition of all its personal lives, without their evil and temptations. This order of evolution is found also in Genesis, chapter 1 and 2, if one reads it in its true esoteric sense, for chapter 1 contains the history of the first 3 rounds, as well as that of the first 3 races of the 4th, up to that moment when man is called to conscious life by the Elohim of wisdom. In the first chapter, animals, whales, and fowls of the air are created before the androgyne Adam. Note, an allegorical reference to the sacred animals of the zodiac and other heavenly bodies. Some Kabbalists see in them the prototypes of the animals. End of note. In the second, Adam the sexless comes first, and the animals only appear after him. Even the state of mental torpor and unconsciousness of the first 2 races and of the first half of the 3rd race is symbolized in the 2nd chapter of Genesis by the deep sleep of Adam. It was the dreamless sleep of mental inaction, the slumber of the soul and mind, which was meant by that sleep, and not at all the physiological process of differentiation of sexes, as a learned French theorist, M. Nodin, imagined. The Puranas, the Chaldean and Egyptian fragments, and also the Chinese traditions, all show an agreement with the secret doctrine as to the process and order of evolution. We find in them the corroboration of almost all our teaching. For instance, the statement concerning the oviparous mode of procreation of the 3rd race, and even a hint at a less innocent mode of the procreation of the first mammal forms, gigantic, transparent, dumb, and monstrous they were, says the commentary. Study the stories of the several rishis and their multifarious progeny. For example, Pulastya is the father of all the serpents and nagas, the oviparous brood. Kashyapa was grandsire, though his wife Tamra of the birds and of Garuda, king of the feathered tribe, while by his wife Surabhi he was the parent of cows and buffaloes, etc., etc. In the secret doctrine, the first Nagas, being wiser than serpents, are the sons of will and yoga, born before the complete separation of the sexes, matured in the man-bearing eggs, produced by the power, Kriya Shakti, of the holy sages of the early third race. Notes. In Hesiod, Zeus creates his third race of men out of ash trees. In the Popol Vuh, the third race of man is created out of the tree Zita, at the marrow of the reed called Sibak. But Sibak means egg in the mystery language of the Artufas, or initiation caves. In a report sent in 1812 to the Cortes by Don Baptista Pinho, it is said, "All the pueblos have their Artufas." So the natives call subterranean rooms with only a single door where they secretly assemble. These are impenetrable temples, and the doors are always closed to the Spaniards. They adore the sun and moon, fire and the great snake, the creative power, whose eggs are called Sibak. There is a notable difference esoterically between the words Sarpa and Naga, though they are both used indiscriminately. Sarpa, serpent, is from the roots srip, skrippo, to creep, and they are called ahi, from ha, to abandon. The Sarpa was produced from Brahma's hair, which, owing to his fright at beholding the yakshas, whom he had created horrible to behold, fell off from the head, each hair becoming a serpent. They are called Sarpa from their creeping, and ahi because they had deserted the head, says Wilson. But the Nagas, their serpent's tail notwithstanding, do not creep, but manage to walk, run, and fight in the allegories. End of notes. In these were incarnated the lords of the three upper worlds, the various classes of Rudras, who had been Tushitas, who had been Jayas, who are Adityas. For, as explained by Parasara, there are 100 appellations of the immeasurably mighty Rudras. Some of the descendants of the primitive Nagas, the serpents of wisdom, peopled America when its continent arose during the palmy days of the great Atlantis, America being the Patala or antipodes of Jambudvipa, not of Bharatavarsha. Otherwise, whence the traditions and legends, the latter always more true than history, as says Augustin Thierry, and even the identity in the names of certain medicine men and priests who exist to this day in Mexico, we shall have to say something of the Nargals and the Nagals, and also of Nagalism, called devil worship by the missionaries. In almost all the Puranas, the story of the sacrifice of Daksha is given, the oldest account of which is to be found in Vayu Purana. Allegorical as it is, there is more meaning and biological revelation in it to a naturalist than in all the pseudo-scientific vagaries, which are regarded as learned theories and hypotheses. Daksha, who is regarded as the chief progenitor, is moreover pointed out as the creator of physical man in the quote fable unquote, which makes him lose his head from his body in the general strife between the gods and the Raumas. This head, being burnt in the fire, is replaced by the head of a ram, Kasikanda. Now the ram's head and horns are ever the symbol of generating power and of reproductive force, and of phallic. As we have shown, it is Daksha who establishes the era of men engendered by sexual intercourse. But this mode of procreation did not occur suddenly, as one may think, and required long ages before it became the one, quote, natural, unquote, way. Therefore his sacrifice to the gods is shown as interfered with by Shiva, the destroying deity, evolution and progress personified, who is the regenerator at the same time, who destroys things under one form but to recall them to life under another more perfect type. Shiva Rudra creates the terrible Virabhadra, born of his breath, the 1,000-headed, 1,000-armed, etc. monster, and commissions him to destroy the sacrifice prepared by Daksha. Then Virabhadra, abiding in the region of the ghosts, or ethereal men, created from the pores of the skin, Romakupas, powerful Raumas, or Raumyas. Note, Wilson translates the word as demigods. See his Vishnu Purana, page 130. But Raumas or Raumias are simply a race, a tribe. End of note. Now, however mythical the allegory, the Mahabharata, which is history as much as is the Iliad, shows the Raumias and other races as springing in the same manner from the Romakupas, hair or skin pores. The allegorical description of the, quote, sacrifice, unquote, is full of significance to the students of the secret doctrine who know of the, quote, sweat-born, unquote. In the Vayu Purana's account of Daksha's sacrifice, moreover, it is said to have taken place in the presence of creatures born from the egg, from the vapor, vegetation, pores of the skin, and finally only from the womb. Daksha typifies the early third race, holy and pure, still devoid of an individual ego, and having merely the passive capacities. Brahma, therefore, commands him to create in the exoteric texts. When obeying the command, he made inferior and superior Avara and Vara progeny, Putra, bipeds and quadrupeds, and by his will gave birth to females, to the gods, the Daityas, giants of the fourth race, the snake gods, animals, cattle, and the Danavas, titans and demon magicians, and other beings. From that period forward, living creatures were engendered by sexual intercourse. Before the time of Daksha, they were variously propagated by the will, by sight, by touch, and by yoga power. And now comes the simply zoological teaching. Verse 29. Animals with bones, dragons of the deep, and flying sarpas, serpents, were added to the creeping things. They that creep on the ground got wings. They with the long necks in the water became the progenitors of the fowls of the air. This is a point on which the teachings and modern biological speculation are in perfect accord. The missing links representing this transition process between reptile and bird are apparent to the veriest bigot, especially in the Ornithoscalidae, Hesperonychus, and the Archaeopteryx of Vogt. Verse 30. During the third race, the boneless animals grew and changed. They became animals with bones, vertebrates, and after that mammalians. Before that, the animals were also ethereal proto-organisms, just as man was. Their chayas became solid also. Verse 31. The animals separated the first into male and female. The fact of former hermaphrodite mammals and the subsequent separation of sexes is now indisputable, even from the standpoint of biology. As Professor Oskar Schmidt, an avowed Darwinist, shows, quote, use and disuse combined with selection elucidate, within brackets question mark, the separation of the sexes and the existence, totally incomprehensible, of rudimentary sexual organs. In the vertebrate especially, each sex possesses such distinct traces of the reproductive apparatus characteristic of the other that even antiquity assumed hermaphroditism as a natural primeval form of mankind. The tenacity with which the rudiments of sexual organs are inherited is remarkable. In the class of mammals, actual hermaphroditism is unheard of, although through the whole period of their development they drag along with them these residues borne by their unknown ancestry. No one can say how long ago. Note: Doctrine of Descent and Darwinism, pages 186 to 187. The unknown ancestry referred to are the primeval astral prototypes. Compare section 2, page 260a. End of note. Verse 31. They, the animals, began to breed. The twofold man then separated also. He, man, said, let us as they, let us unite and make creatures. They did. Verse 32. And those which had no spark, their narrow-brained, took huge she-animals unto them. Note on the narrow-brained. See verse 24. End of note. The animals separated the first, says stanza 31. Bear in mind that at that period men were different, even physiologically, from what they are now, having passed the middle point of the fifth race. We are not told what the huge she-animals were, but they certainly were as different from any we know now as were the men. This was the first physical, quote, fall into matter, unquote, of some of the then existing and lower races. Bear in mind stanza 24. The sons of wisdom had spurned the early third race, that is, the non-developed, and are shown incarnating in and thereby endowing with intellect the later third race. Thus the sin of the brainless or mindless races, who had no spark and were irresponsible, fell upon those who failed to do by them their karmic duty. Verse 32 continued. They begat upon them dumb races. Dumb they were, the narrow-brained, themselves. But their tongues united. The tongues of their progeny remained still. Monsters they bred, a race of crooked, red-hair-covered monsters, going on all fours. A dumb race, to keep the shame untold. Notes. These animals, or monsters, are not the anthropoid or any other apes, but verily what the anthropologists might call the missing link, the primitive lower man, see infra. Note on a dumb race to keep the shame untold. The shame of their animal origin, which our modern scientists would emphasize if they could. End of notes. They begat upon them dumb races. Dumb they were, the narrow-brained, themselves, but their tongues united. See later on concerning the beginning of human speech. Commentary. What may be the objections to the foregoing? Thus occultism rejects the idea that nature developed man from the ape, or even from an ancestor common to both, but traces, on the contrary, some of the most anthropoid species to the third race man of the early Atlantean period. As this proposition will be maintained and defended elsewhere, a few words more are all that are needed at present. For greater clearness, however, we shall repeat in brief what was said previously in Book 1, stanza 6. Our teachings show that, while it is quite correct to say that nature had built at one time around the human astral form an ape-like external shape, yet it is as correct that this shape was no more that of the, quote, missing link, unquote, than were the coverings of that astral form during the course of its natural evolution through all the kingdoms of nature. Nor was it, as shown in the proper place, on this fourth round planet that such evolution took place, but only during the first, second, and third rounds, when man was, in turn, a stone, a plant, an animal, until he became what he was in the first root race of present humanity. The real line of evolution differs from the Darwinian, and the two systems are irreconcilable, except when the latter is divorced from the dogma of natural selection and the like. Indeed, between the monada of Haeckel and the Sadisripa of Manu, there lies an impassable chasm in the shape of the jiva, for the human monad, whether immetalized in the stone atom, or invegetalized in the plant, or inanimalized in the animal, is still and ever a divine, hence also a human monad. It ceases to be human only when it becomes absolutely divine. The terms mineral, vegetable, and animal monad are meant to create a superficial distinction. There is no such thing as a monad, jiva, other than divine, and consequently having been or having to become human. And the latter term has to remain meaningless unless the difference is well understood. The monad is a drop out of the shoreless ocean beyond all to be correct within the plane of primeval differentiation. It is divine in its higher and human in its lower condition, and the adjectives higher and lower being used for lack of better words. And a monad it remains at all times, save in the nirvanic state under whatever conditions or whatever external forms. As the Logos reflects the universe in the divine mind, and the manifested universe reflects itself in each of its monads, as Leibniz put it, repeating an Eastern teaching, so the monad has, during the cycle of its incarnations, to reflect in itself every root form of each kingdom. Therefore the Kabbalists say correctly that man becomes a stone, a plant, an animal, a man, a spirit, and finally God, thus accomplishing his cycle or circuit, and returning to the point from which he had started as the heavenly man. But by man the divine monad is meant, and not the thinking entity, much less his physical body. While rejecting the immortal soul, the men of science now try to trace the latter through a series of animal forms, from the lowest to the highest, whereas in truth all the present fauna are the descendants of those primordial monsters of which the stanzas speak. The animals, the creeping beasts, and those in the waters that preceded man in this fourth round, as well as those contemporary with the third race, and again the mammalia that are posterior to the third and fourth races, are all either directly or indirectly the mutual and correlative product, physically, of man. It is correct to say that the man of this manvantara, that is, during the three preceding rounds, has passed through all the kingdoms of nature. That he was a stone, a plant, an animal. But these stones, plants, and animals were the prototypes, the filmy presentments of those of the fourth round, and B, even those at the beginning of the fourth round were the astral shadows of the present, as the occultists express it. And finally the forms and genera of neither man, animal, nor plant were what they became later. Thus the astral prototypes of the lower beings of the animal kingdom of the fourth round, which preceded the chayas of men, were the consolidated, though still very ethereal, sheets of the still more ethereal forms or models produced at the close of the third round on globe D. Produced from the residue of the substance matter, from dead bodies of men and other extinct animals of the wheel before, or the previous third round, as stanza 24 tells us. Hence, while the nondescript animals that preceded the astral man at the beginning of this life cycle on our earth were still, so to speak, the progeny of the man of the third round, the mammalians of this round owe their existence in a great measure to man again. Moreover, the ancestor of the present anthropoid animal, the ape, is the direct production of the yet mindless man who desecrated his human dignity by putting himself physically on the level of an animal. The above accounts of some of the alleged physiological proofs brought forward by the anthropologists as a demonstration of the descent of man from the animals. The point most insisted upon by the evolutionists is that the history of the embryo is an epitome of that of the race. That every organism in its development from an egg runs through a series of forms through which, in like succession, its ancestors have passed in the long course of Earth's history. Note: a very strong argument in favor of variability is supplied by the science of embryology. Is not a man in the uterus a simple cell, a vegetable with 3 or 4 leaflets, a tadpole with branchiae, a mammal with a tail, lastly a primate, within brackets question mark, and a biped? It is scarcely possible not to recognize in the embryonic evolution a rapid sketch, a faithful summary of the entire organic series. Quote from Lefebvre, Philosophy, page 484, end of note. The history of the embryo is a picture in little and outline of that of the race. This conception forms the gist of our fundamental biogenetic law, which we are obliged to place at the head of the study of the fundamental law of organic development. Note: The Proofs of Evolution, a lecture by Haeckel. End of note. This modern theory was known as a fact too, and far more philosophically expressed by the sages and occultists from the remotest ages. A passage from Isis Unveiled may here be cited to furnish a few points of comparison. In Volume 1, pages 388 to 389, it was asked why, with all their great learning, physiologists were unable to explain teratological phenomena. Any anatomist who has made the development and growth of the embryo a subject of special study can tell without much brain work what daily experience and the evidence of his own eyes show him, meaning that up to a certain period the human embryo is a facsimile of a young batrachian in its first remove from the spawn, a tadpole. But no physiologist or anatomist seems to have had the idea of applying to the development of the human being, from the first instant of its physical appearance as a germ to its ultimate formation and birth, the Pythagorean esoteric doctrine of metempsychosis, so erroneously interpreted by critics. The meaning of the axiom, a stone becomes a plant a beast a man, etc., was mentioned in another place in relation to the spiritual and physical evolution of men on this earth. We will now add a few more words to make the matter clearer. What is the primitive shape of the future man? A grain, a corpuscle, say some physiologists, a molecule, an ovum of the ovum, say others. If it could be analyzed by the microscope or otherwise, or what ought we to expect to find it composed? Analogically, we should say of a nucleus of inorganic matter deposited from the circulation at the germinating point, and united with the deposit of organic matter. In other words, this infinitesimal nucleus of the future man is composed of the same elements as a stone, of the same elements as the earth, which the man is destined to inhabit. Moses is cited by the Kabbalist as authority for the remark that it required earth and water to make a living being, and thus it may be said that the man first appears as a stone. At the end of 3 or 4 weeks the ovum has assumed a plant-like appearance, one extremity having become spheroidal and the other tapering like a carrot. Upon dissection it is found to be composed like an onion of very delicate laminae or coats, enclosing a liquid. The laminae approach each other at the lower end, and the embryo hangs from the root of the umbilicus almost like the fruit from the bough. The stone has now become changed by, quote, metempsychosis, unquote, into a plant. Then the embryonic creature begins to shoot out from the inside outward its limbs and develops its features. The eyes are visible as 2 black dots. The ears, nose, and mouth form depressions like the points of a pineapple before they begin to project. The embryo develops into an animal-like fetus, the shape of a tadpole, and, like an amphibious reptile, lives in water and develops from it. Its monad has not yet become either human or immortal, for the Kabbalists tells us that this only occurs at the, quote, 4th hour, unquote. One by one the fetus assumes the characteristics of the human being. The first flutter of the immortal breath passes through its being, it moves, and the divine essence settles in the infant's frame, which it will inhabit until the moment of physical death, when man becomes a spirit. This mysterious process of a 9 months formation the Kabbalists call the completion of the individual cycle of evolution. As the fetus develops amidst the liqueur amni in the womb, so the earths germinate in the universal ether, or astral fluid, in the womb of the universe. These cosmic children, like their pygmy inhabitants, are at first nuclei, then ovules, then gradually mature and becoming mothers, in their turn develop mineral, vegetable, animal, and human forms. From center to circumference, from the imperceptible vesicle to the uttermost conceivable bounds of the cosmos, those glorious thinkers, the occultists, trace cycle merging into cycle, containing and contained in an endless series. The embryo evolving in its prenatal sphere, the individual in his family, the family in the state in mankind, the earth in our system, that system in its central universe, the universe in the cosmos, and the cosmos in the one cause. Thus runs their philosophy of evolution, differing, as we see, from that of Haeckel. Quote, all are but parts of one stupendous whole, whose body nature is, and Parabrahm, the soul. Unquote. These are the proofs of occultism, and they are rejected by science. But how is the chasm between the mind of man and animal to be bridged in this case? How if the anthropoid and Homo primigenius had, argumenti gratia, the common ancestor, in the way modern speculation puts it, did the 2 groups diverge so widely from one another as regards mental capacity? True, the occultist may be told that in every case occultism does what science repeats. It gives a common ancestor to ape and man, since it makes the former issue from primeval man. But that primeval man was man only in external form. He was mindless and soulless at the time he begot, with a female animal monster, the forefather of a series of apes. This speculation, if speculation it be, is at least logical, and fills the chasm between the mind of man and animal. Thus it accounts for and explains the hitherto unaccountable and inexplicable. The fact that, in the present stage of evolution, science is almost certain that no issue can follow from the union of man and animal is considered and explained elsewhere. Now, what is the fundamental difference between the accepted, or nearly so, conclusions as enunciated in the pedigree of man, meaning that man and ape have a common ancestor, and the teachings of occultism which deny this conclusion and accept the fact that all things and all living beings have originated from one common source? Materialistic science makes man evolve gradually to what he is now, and, starting from the first protoplasmic speck called moneron, which we are told has, like the rest, originated in the course of immeasurable ages from a few, or from a one simple, spontaneously arising original form that has obeyed one law of evolution, passed through unknown and unknowable types up to the ape, and thence to the human being. Where the transitional shapes are discoverable we are not told, for the simple reason that no, quote, missing links, unquote, between man and the apes have ever yet been found, though this fact in no way prevents men like Haeckel from inventing them ad libitum. Nor will they ever be met with simply again because that link which unites man with his real ancestry is searched for on the objective plane and in the material world of forms, whereas it is safely hidden from the microscope and dissecting knife within the animal tabernacle of man himself. We repeat what we have said in Isis Unveiled. All things had their origin in spirit, evolution having originally begun from above and proceeded downward, instead of the reverse as taught in the Darwinian theory. In other words, there has been a gradual materialization of forms until a fixed ultimate of debasement is reached. This point is that at which the doctrine of modern evolution enters into the arena of speculative hypotheses. Arrived at this period, we will find it easy to understand Haeckel's Anthropogeny, which traces the pedigree of man from its protoplasmic root, sodden in the mud of seas which existed before the oldest of the fossiliferous rocks were deposited, according to Professor Huxley's exposition. We may believe the man of the third round evolved by gradual modification of an astral mammal of ape-like organization, still easier when we remember that, though in a more condensed and less elegant, but still as comprehensible phraseology, the same theory was said by Beressus to have been taught many thousands of years before his time by the manfish Oannes or Dagon, the semi-demon of Babylonia, though in somewhat modified lines. But what lies back of the Darwinian line of descent? So far as he is concerned, nothing but unverifiable hypothesis. For, as he puts it, he views all beings as the lineal descendants of some few beings which lived long before the first bed of the Silurian system was deposited. Note, see Origin of Species, pages 448 and 489 on the first edition. End of note. He does not attempt to show us who these few beings were, but it answers our purpose quite as well, for in the admission of their existence at all, we sought to the ancients for corroboration, and elaboration of the idea receives the stamp of scientific approbation. Unquote, from Isis Unveiled. Truly, as also said in our first work, if we accept Darwin's theory of the development of species, we find that his starting point is placed in front of an open door. We are at liberty with him to either remain within or cross the threshold beyond which lies the limitless and the incomprehensible, or rather the unutterable. If our mortal language is inadequate to express what our spirit dimly foresees in the great beyond while on this earth, it must realize it at some point in the timeless eternity. But what lies beyond Haeckel's theory? Why, Batubius Haeckel and no more. A further answer is given in Part 3, Addenda. Next chapter is Stanza 9, the final evolution
of man.